Hi, everyone. How are you? My name is Ana Martinez. Welcome to our family podcast. Today, we have two guests representing fifth and sixth grade today. Introduce yourselves, guests, your name, how many years you've been in education, and what grade levels you've taught.
Excited about. I started out in South Los Angeles as a third grade student teacher. So I spent time in third grade, fifth grade, 2 years in sixth grade, and then I am starting my second year in seventh grade where I am in Huntington Park.
Nice, thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Luis Torritos. Like Chapman, I was actually a year before Chapman was a teacher, so I have 6 years. I got 1 year on you, Chapman. I've been teaching in South Central for those full 6 years. I've been teaching fifth grade math, and I just recently got changed to third grade.
We're going to go into story time. I start with the story. So some of you may or may not know, I was a principal for a few years, for about 8 years to be exact. I founded my own school in South Los Angeles, and I was inspired by my elementary school principal. So her name was Miss Faye B. Jones. I don't know. I tried to look her up. I tried to find a picture. It's been hard. But she really inspired me because she was such a loving, caring, tall, beautiful African-American principal, and just so intelligent. And I remember always giving me compliments on my leadership. And so I think about that sticks with a kid, how a compliment from a teacher or principal, the principal said, Mom, and I get so excited. And so I always held that in my heart. I'm wondering, did you have someone in your educational experience that kind of influenced you in that way?
Yeah, I definitely did.
Yeah.
In 10th grade, I had a teacher, his name was Mr. Bruna. And then just randomly, he was noticing really good work that I was doing. And he was like, hey, how would you like to come for lunch and eat Subway with me? And he bought me a Subway and then he told me everything that I was like, I see you doing this well, I see you doing this well. I'm like, oh, wow, somebody's noticing,
I feel like I don't have the best experience with teachers. I didn't have a teacher that was super mean to me. But I feel like I had a really hard time connecting to teachers. And I think as an adult looking back, it's because I never had a teacher that looked like me. I didn't have a Black teacher until college. But one teacher that sticks out to me was my calculus teacher in high school, Mr. Sai. I'm really outgoing. I'm super talkative. And he was the only one that I felt didn't make me feel bad for being talkative. He definitely moved me around in the classroom, but did it in a loving way. And so that literally till this day, that is the teacher that I always, if someone's going to ask me what teacher, I'm Mr. Sai, he was so sweet. I didn't feel like I was a bad student, and he was just always very loving in the classroom. So that's something that I try my best to be as a teacher myself.
Well, that's so important. And I want to do a plug for anybody who's watching and thinking about being a teacher or thinking about going into education. Kids need to see people that look like them. I think I don't remember having a Latina teacher until my Spanish teacher in high school. So we see ourselves in our teachers. And so I think that's so important. And not everybody has this amazing positive experience with school. So I love that you centered that, because I know how important it is for you to build relationships with your students. So that's great. Maybe is that a motivation for you to go out of your way to build those relationships with your students?
No, absolutely. And it's not even just, I do have a soft spot for my Black and African-American students, but at the same time, I think it's so good for all students to see teachers and educators from different backgrounds, because it's just going to allow them to be more well-rounded when they go off to college and see different people that are maybe didn't come from their family or didn't come from their communities.
Yeah, I love it. Well, let's go into our questions. So if you're watching our podcast, this is a podcast. Today we're focusing on 5th and 6th grade. We're clumping them together. It's the fun age of 10 and 11. What are some personality traits or things that we can expect from a 10-year-old in September and August? Such a fun age, right? 10 and 11. What's going on with them? Their bodies, their mind, their hormones. What's happening with them? What can you tell us?
Well, man, this is a fun age. I think it's a fun age because this is the first time they're going, this is a big milestone. They're turning 10 years old, right? The double digits. So in their mind, they're like, oh, I feel like an adult now, right? but they're still little. They're still little. They've only been here 10 years. So they have this personality like, oh, I'm big. I'm in the 10, the double digits now, right? So they have this mentality, and something that I notice a lot in them, because they do have this mentality, is that they like to question things more, right? So because they're naturally curious, and they're developing their own view of this world. So a lot of times they do question things, and sometimes the things that they question is you, right? You and your authority, right? So I think understanding that, like they're curious, they're barely discovering this world, they're barely discovering like people. They're gonna question things, and it may come off as rude to some people, but I think if you have that understanding, that is just the curiosity, I would say. I think that's really helpful to help you like work with them, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about you, Ms. Chapman?
I always think more on the parents and what parents have spoken to me about. And I think the biggest thing between 5th and 6th, and I'm in 7th now, is that transition. And they transition into that preteen at different times. And so the one thing is like, they never used to do this anymore, or they give me attitude, and so I think parents need to come in knowing their kid's going to change. I know it's so difficult because there are those sweet 3rd and 4th graders to like listen to everything you told them. And I think like, Cerrito said, like they're going to start questioning you. And I always encourage the students to question, but just in a respectful way. And they're even learning how to speak to each other, to grown-ups, to people they don't know, to people they do know. But it's that mindset as a parent of letting go a little bit of that adolescent piece and getting ready for them to become a teenager, I think is really huge, that they're just not mentally or emotionally prepared for. So
I love that you both said that, because I think I've heard that happen. Many parents say that too. Like, they never used to do this. And they, one, start thinking it's the friends they're hanging out with. Or two, they think it's the school. Like, they never did this before, especially with kids that are new in a school. And I think, one, it's normal. It does not define who you are as a parent. You've done an amazing job. It actually is, they're having more, like Mr. Cerrito said, more curiosity in the world, and they want to know why, and they want to start being more independent and making their own choices and feeling kind of like, I'm in the double digits, I'm a teenager almost. And so, but they're like still kids, and they still want to play tag, and they still, so that's so funny. So this age in particular is when for sure we start saying building relationships. So for parents who, if it's your child, you're probably fed up, like, don't ask me. I said no, right? But in reality, if you did that to the 30 kids in your classroom, you probably wouldn't get any of them to listen to you, right? So I'm wondering, how do you even begin to build a relationship in August and September with a 10 or 11-year-old?
I can start on this one, I guess. So I'm like a grown-up teenager, and so I love to, I'm always interested in what they're interested in, but I also want to make sure that I have something to talk to them about. And I think that's anyone that is a teacher that has a nephew and niece, that, anyone that interacts with kids, like, you need to be, hip with what they're doing. And it also helps you to understand, like, if there are things that may not be age appropriate. And so I feel like the beginning of the year is a lot of just like, what are you guys interested in? Like, I watch TikToks, or back in the day, it was like the spinners. I mean, there was like everything, like as a teacher, and especially this age group, like you have to keep up and make sure that they know that you're genuinely interested, because that's how you're going to get them to do the writing or the reading, or like what you figure out to bring in to get them really interested in the content that you're teaching. So that's normally how I do it.
Yeah, I will have to agree with Chapman. She talked about like finding the students' interest, right? Like that's the best way to like build a relationship with like anybody, right? Like you find a common interest that you guys have, and you guys talk about it, and then just like slowly build upon that. So I think I do the same to find like, or to build the relationships with my students. Another thing that I wanted to add to that was just like Yeah, just spend the time with the students. I think if you invest that time to just find with that interest in mind, I think that will help out a lot.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I know both of you personally. Like, Ashley, you stay in the classroom with them, you chat with them, you engage with them, and I know, Luis, you go outside and you play soccer with them or handball, and so you really try to tailor it to what you also can do and how to bridge with them, right? So I really, really appreciate that. And I think, motivation, like how is a fifth and sixth graders motivation in like August and September, and how can a parent get them to become interested or improve their motivation if they're lacking it?
I think a lot of things that happen is once they get to fifth grade, they have already been deemed like the bad student, or I'm really bad at math, or I'm not a reader. And sometimes, unfortunately, parents can kind of feed into that. They're like, like they're really bad at math. Like, I just want to let you know. And so I think it takes not just the educator, but it takes the parent to really, like, we have to work as a team to break kind of those low self-esteem pieces to get them excited or into it. So if they're going to fifth grade, right, that's their last year at their elementary school. If they're going into sixth grade at a middle school, like, that's a whole brand new canvas. And so especially if they're going into middle school, like, parents can really paint that, like, I know this was your experience in elementary school, but like, this is your brand new, like, you're going to meet new people, new teachers. This is like your clean slate. And it's really a lot on the parents to help motivate and promote just like that positivity, even if their elementary years were not the best.
Right. So like me as a teacher, what I like to do is start off with the clean slate, like for every single student in the beginning of the year. Right. And the students, usually they come motivated, they come wanting to do good, right, in the beginning of the year. And then you catch onto that motivation, and then you bring it up to them, like little by little by little, like bringing it up, like, hey, I see you doing this well. Hey, I see that you're trying a lot in your math work. I see that you're reading a lot. Start pointing those little things out and make it grow. Like, just make it grow. And because like they will start off with a lot of motivation, and then like with just like anybody else would, right, they come back down. So they need somebody to keep that motivation going. And since like the beginning of the year is a perfect time to do that, and then the middle of the year is like keep the motivation going. Like as a parent, you need to keep them motivated too. As a teacher, you need to keep them motivated. And if you're a student, you need to hold yourself accountable too, to keep yourself motivated.
I love that you both said that. They start creating their identity of school and who they are in school. And you're like, they're 10. They literally have only been in school 5-6 years, right? But for them to make such fixed mindset statements like, I am good at math, I am bad at math, or whatever it is, it really talks about where they felt successful and where they felt failed, right? So I love this idea of when you enter this classroom or when you enter this school year, it is a clean slate. It's like how we enter the new year, like, oh, 2020, I'm going to do all these things, right? And you get demoted, like you get unmotivated by like March, April, and that happened, and we got really unmotivated. So I think this is a good opportunity to have what we call growth mindset, not only for kids, but for adults too. If you get a kid in your classroom that everybody talks about was bad at something, giving them a clean slate too, right? So Carol Dweck, who wrote the book on mindset, talks about like the adults also should have that mindset. So I really, really appreciate that. And I really appreciate this thing you said, Luis, about writing goals in the beginning of the year and then noticing, how are you doing on this goal? Revisiting that. And I'm seeing you put in the effort. So not necessarily the outcome, but the process. And that reminds me of like some SEL strategies, right? Social emotional learning. I'm wondering, right now, everybody thinks SEL is new. They think teachers, it's this new thing. But in reality, we've been doing it all the time. I'm wondering about some social emotional learning strategies or tips that you give a fifth or sixth grader in the beginning of the year.
Definitely with the motivation, if we want to keep going with that, goal setting is something that we touch a lot on for the social emotional, like either like goal setting with your work, goal setting with who you are or who you want to be as a person by the end of fifth grade. I know one of the activities that I do like to do is the fifth graders in the beginning of the year like to write a letter to themselves at the end of the year, and then just have them see how much growth they've been able to do and like where their mind was at in the beginning of the year to where their mind is at the end of the year, and just have that like self-awareness, you know. So I think it's just the goal setting helps you with your self-awareness, especially if you're keeping track of it, which is something else that I was going to talk about earlier. Like we talk about like the clean slate is the beginning of the year, but the clean slate could also be the beginning of each day. And the way you start your clean slate is with that. The way if you do track your goals, like if you are trying to lose weight, right, you will have your calendar, and then you will write your weight down, right, every day. That's how you do it if you want to lose weight. So with the students is the same way. Like if you have a goal for them every single day, that's a good strategy that you could help them for the motivation.
Yeah, before you answer that, Ashley, I want to say, and some students, you might have a fifth or sixth grader who's hyperactive. Some students need goals by like hour chunks within the day because a week seems too far away or the end of the day seems too far away. So like, if I could just make it to 9 o'clock and do this, I'm successful. So I really appreciate that. Ashley, what are some SEL strategies that you use in your classroom?
So kind of piggybacking on Cerritos with goal setting, I love the idea of introducing growth mindset and fixed mindset at the beginning of the year. And I feel like the teachers, you know, before me and after me in our grade spans, like cover this, but it's almost like every new year they forget. And so there's this really cool like worksheet that I use that has sayings for fixed mindsets, sayings for growth. And I tell them like independently, we're going to work like 10 minutes. I want you to circle whatever sayings you've done for each, and I want you to calculate which one has the most, and then setting goals on that. Like my goal is to say more of this, or the goal is to say more of that. And in like their notebooks or their binders, that's something that they hold on to, and we revisit throughout the year to say like, do we think we've gotten better with growth mindset? Do we still think we're fixed? And with that, along with just their esteem, it's good for parents to know, even students, like things like growth mindset or your esteem, like that takes a while to build. And so, I mean, I've looped with students before, and it took maybe at the end of the second year for them to really feel confident. And I think it's important for kids, the students and the parents, to know that it is a process. And it's not something that like we're motivating them for a month or two and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I've got a growth mindset and I think I love math now. That it's just a process. And like you said, parents also need to recognize and do that work. And I think the moment that they realize, oh man, like maybe my kid just saw me having a fixed mindset, it's going to help them change. And their kid's going to also see that inner work that the parent did as well.
That's awesome. I love that. I'm going to transition us into some of the content areas that I know parents are very curious about. So if you're just tuning in, we're talking about fifth and sixth grade, which is 10 and 11 years old. And so the funny thing is you each teach a very specific content area. You teach reading and writing. Cerritos, you've been teaching math and science, right? So let's start off with math, and feel free to chime in, Ms. Chapman. So what are some of the biggest things that kids learn at the end of the year? Be brief on that because we want to focus more on August and September. But what are some of the end of the year things that a fifth grader should know?
So the main concepts, right? You're asking like,
yeah,
you should have learned in fifth grade. So some of the biggest one, well, actually there's two biggest ones in fifth grade, but let me start with fractions. Fractions is a big one that is not just big in fifth grade, it's big in fourth grade, and it's big in third grade as well. And it's going to be, I think it touches a little bit on it in sixth grade, but not too much, but it's really big in fifth grade. Within like the whole big concept of fractions, there's adding and subtracting fractions. There's adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators. There's adding mixed numbers, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. So you have your four main operations, and you work with the fractions. Another big concept is place value understanding. So with place value understanding, you know where like your ones are at, your tens are at. Yeah, that's something that they did in fourth grade and in third grade, but in fifth grade they go into the decimal place value. I think fourth grade does that too, but in fifth grade they go to the thousands. So they need to understand like what each place value is compared to the next one. So each place value is 10 times either greater or 10 times smaller than its previous one.
Make a connection for you here. What I'm hearing from you is fractions adding and subtracting different denominators, mixed numbers. And I know that they start in third grade with like the most basic fractions, like certain numbers only. Fourth grade, they build it. Fifth grade, they learn adding and subtracting. I think multiplicating and dividing. By sixth grade, it's proportions, but we won't get into that conceptual sense. So I really appreciate that. And I'm going to ask you at the end to give me some math resources or websites that parents can engage for free. So maybe have that on deck. I'm going to transition really quickly to reading or writing. So for you to know, I know this about Ashley, she teaches them together. So I'm thinking the best way to teach reading and writing, what are some tips and tricks that we should keep in mind?
So I kind of want to add into Cerrito. So just like Cerrito said, with fractions and multiplication, it builds. And so parents are always like, sometimes don't understand that with reading. The biggest piece for me, at least as an educator, is that comprehension piece, that understanding. And that starts in third grade and it builds. And so between third and fourth grade, there's a lot of really difficult reading levels they have to jump. And so sometimes they don't get there in time, and that's okay. But that makes it difficult when they get to fifth and sixth. The biggest thing is the texts get longer. There are more characters. And so it's a lot more difficult to keep up. And so the biggest, easiest thing that parents can do, and it can even ask their teachers for resources, are graphic organizers. Like I, as a reader, sometimes need to write and jot down like, this chapter just had 5 characters. Like I know they're going to come back at some point. But that comprehension, that piece, that understanding. And I know a lot of times, students don't have the books they love or are interested in. And I do have resources for that, like websites that are free. But they can even watch a TV show. They can even read like a short article that can kind of help them, like, hey, we're going to watch the news together, this one small clip, or even watch this really, small radio section, right? Maybe they're listening to something on the radio and pause and say, okay, what did you just remember from that? And just reminding them, like, no matter what they see or what they're watching or what they're listening to, that's always an opportunity to say, hey, what did you just listen to? And like, how did you remember that? But I think the biggest thing is that remembering, and as you grow in grades, it's not only length, but it's also complexity. So you've got new vocabulary. There's different topics and genres that come up that they maybe weren't used to in the third or fourth grade. So it's just the difficulty, but it's coming in with that chunking piece, like telling them to read a paragraph at a time or 2 paragraphs, like working them up to it. Because I definitely had students that read below grade level that do amazing, and they just have to use some extra resources and things to help them comprehend that more difficult complexity as they get older.
I appreciate you said that. So by the end of fifth or by the end of sixth, they're reading longer text with like a lot of characters. It's like a movie. It's like all these characters. In the lower grades, you see a simple text, thinner, and it usually only has 1 character, maybe 2 characters, and they start adding more. And just like we said in my third grade podcast, we talked about building stamina. So that's true for reading, writing, and math, right? Like a kid in 5th grade in August and September, like how much time do you expect them to stay on task, like uninterrupted?
It depends on the student. I can be between 10 to 30 minutes. Like if I have a student that just loves reading, they have their favorite genres, they have their favorite, series, they could read for an hour. But the students that come in, it's not because they're not capable, it's because they just haven't found something they love. And I honestly, when I was in 5th and 6th, like sometimes we would start out with our independent reading at just 10 minutes. And I'd have a tracker in the classroom, which parents can have at home, and say, you know what, every Saturday, like we're going to track like how much did we read before we get distracted? And the students really love to see that growth over time. And that's how they know, like, oh my gosh, like in August, I could only read for 2 minutes. And now in October, like I'm reading for like 15. But within that, you're introducing different things and different genres and different types of books. And you're guaranteed to have them find something that they really love. And that's also going to boost their stamina when they enjoy what they're reading.
And I really appreciate that. There's so many characters in these types of books, and these are the fiction books, right? So it's okay, and it's like stop and think about who is that character, what's that character's personality, how is that character making choices, what do you infer about the character? Because you can make connections to like their own life. Like What is that saying about you? What kind of choices are you making? And a lot of the books are about that kind of learning. Is this also when you introduce nonfiction texts as well? And how much of it in the beginning of the year?
I mean, I personally love to have it kind of intertwined, like as they get older, especially in middle school, like everything is interweaved and taught together. I like to bring in nonfiction when it comes to like current events. So that's what I really like to grab them with. Is this idea of like, oh my gosh, like, did you hear about this new game that was out? Or did you hear about what schools might do as far as like their starting times? And that's the biggest thing with both fiction and nonfiction is like, you've got to get something to get their attention. And then that's when you can bring in all these different pieces, because with nonfiction, it is so much more difficult, even as an adult, to read nonfiction. Like I am rereading nonfiction books as an adult over and over, just a little bit, because I'm like, what does that word mean? And I'm like looking it up in a dictionary. So I think parents with nonfiction or fiction, they have to love it. I try to find common themes or relations within them that also really helps as an educator for them to be like, we read this in this fiction book, but this actually, a part of this was actually real. And this is what actually happened in that. So it's really, really simple sometimes to connect that current event piece with that fiction novel that they might be reading in class.
Yeah, this reminds me of connecting it back to something you both said. This is when they start becoming interested and having their opinions. And if you are at home and you have a 5th grade student and they do not want to read that book that the teacher assigned, but they want to read, and this reminds me of Cerritos because he also teaches science, they only want to read that science book. And then it's better to have them read that science book than no book at all, right? Because at least they're gaining their interest, they're gaining their stamina, they're learning specific vocabulary. And the best way a student learns is if they're reading all the books related to one topic. So they really love baseball, read a fiction book about baseball, a nonfiction book about baseball, have them write about baseball. If they really love unicorns, like, you know, try to stay within the theme. And I think because they have an awareness of their world, this is a good time to say, well, let's read some of the newspapers. Let's read some of the pandemic stuff. I mean, some of it might be at an 8th grade level, but we can probably find some things at their level. And I would probably ask you for a resource later, Ms. Chapman, about what parents can use at home. But what about their writing? What are they writing? What do we expect in their writing in August or September?
Writing, I find to be the most difficult thing for students to want to do. And I think it comes from a lot of students might have struggled in writing at some point in their education. And because maybe they don't spell things, oh my goodness, the spelling, even with 7th graders, they're like, oh, I'm not going to write because I'm not going to spell it correctly. And it's really, really huge with not just educators, but parents to say, and I tell my students, like, I don't care if you're spelling all these words wrong. Like, I'm a teacher. I have this gift where it doesn't matter what it looks like. I can probably read it. And I think it's little self-esteem pieces of getting them just to write. And so what I did, and I love to do, is creative writing. So I'll give them a picture and I'm like, I want you to write a story about this picture. Like there was one picture one time, there was a cat or a dog that was like playing with a toilet paper roll, and then the toilet paper was everywhere. And it was like, imagine like your parent just walked in and saw your cat or your dog just throwing the toilet paper, like what would they say? And so I think a creative writing is something that I like to bring in the beginning, or even like self-identity. Like, who do you identify as, especially once they get 6th and 7th grade, like they know like who they are, or even like drama, like you have to bring in what they're interested in, and even doing like smaller pieces. So same thing with reading. It's like, it's a stamina piece. I also have like a writing stamina chart of like, we're just going to write for like 2 minutes, get as much done as possible, and build that over the course of that semester, or over the course of that quarter. But again, just being creative, and there's that self-esteem piece of the spelling that I find to be the biggest hurdle to get over with students.
Right. And we don't want them, parents, to spend like an hour, 2 hours on spelling, but you could probably put maybe 15, 20 minutes a day on spelling words for that week, just so that they can get better maybe. So on to that, did you have parents asking you like what type of schedule they should have their kid on and what works best? And what would you tell parents? Yeah, like while they're at home, like what are the school hours? Because, you know, school hours are typically like, say, 8 to 3.
Mm-hmm. So something that we've started in our school is we have blocks, right? Certain blocks that they need to be with the teacher live, and then certain blocks when they need to be just in a small group. setting, and then there's certain blocks that they go to their specials, to either art or dance. So throughout the whole, this is still fitting like if it was a regular school day. The hours are still the same. So that's how most schools are going to be. The hours are going to be the same. So we're trying to fit everything that they did receive during before the pandemic, like the live teaching, the small group instruction. We're still fitting that. So we're still seeing this as like you start at 8 a.m. in our school. That depends on your district, right? And then we have our learning time. We have our special times. We have our lunch, right? Because they will get a lunch. They will have a recess, right? We most places are leaving spaces for recess, for lunch, for all that. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. What about you, Ashley?
I mean, it was a little bit tough with the middle schoolers, but I feel like telling parents there's multiple things depending on what type of student. Like if you have a student with a disability, maybe autistic, I had some students that just really struggled with like being overwhelmed. And so letting students know that you're doing a little bit at a time. And then if it's something that you're really stuck on, that know that you can reach out to your teacher and to not be really stressed. I think that once they hit that age of 5th and 6th, like they start to feel like I have so many classes and I have so much work to do. But I do agree with Cerritos, like keeping that schedule, which I know, like, especially when they get cell phones, like I had students gaming till 2 a.m. And so it does help with the parents to like take away, like, okay, at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., I'm going to take the cell phone away. Like, I want to see what work you get done the next day. And the parents will check in with me as well. Like, Miss Chapman, like, did so-and-so do his or her work? And if they got it done, then that was their reward for getting their work done. But I think sticking to that normal school schedule, getting up, if they got up at 6:30 or 7, taking a shower, eating breakfast, like setting that schedule. And I think even if parents are working, whether they're working from home, going to work, like I think giving them that expectation, like printing out a schedule, even if it's like them creating that schedule on their own, or, you know, you print it out from the computer just so that they know that this is the time. Okay, I have a break right now, or this is my lunchtime. I need to make sure that I eat something. But trying to stick as close to what their schedule would be like physically in school, even though we are doing more of a virtual learning piece for the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and I was going to add to that because you should also have an area where the student is designed just for the student to work. An area that's free from like cell phones around, free from like having games around, from any distractions, because we are doing a lot of the work. I mean, I know it's hard for me, like doing the work at my home when I have distractions. Sometimes I see that guitar in the background and I just want to strum it, right? It's just because that distraction is there. So if the students have a place at home where like you get them into the mentality that this is school, this is time for school, you go to school from this time to this time, this is where you're going to be, where you do your work. It could be whatever. It doesn't have to be a desk. It doesn't have to be a chair. It could be the floor, right? Just a certain area where it's designed for their learning.
So what I'm hearing is a schedule with like maybe chunks, maybe create it with the student. I would even include something the student likes to do. Like, do you want, like, that's not a part of their school schedule. Maybe you create a project from this learning. Maybe you create something at home, or you do a cooking time, you know, with me as the mom, or with your dad. And then I heard a designated area just for them so that they can associate that area with learning. And I like the idea of posting either a schedule or some of their goals in that area. So that way they know, oh, this is associated with school. And what I'm hearing too is, you said this a lot, Ashley, of building stamina. In the beginning, a 5th and 6th grader or any student should get more breaks, because we're not used to sitting on the computer or in a certain place, right? And so you probably give more movement breaks. Is that correct?
Yes. And even just like as an like we're starting our PDs, and so our schools are like implementing like these, just like walk away, get a 5-10 minute break. And so that's my goal as well as an educator. Like, I feel like parents also have to know, like, even in school, like we might be able to do like a 20-minute lesson before they start getting antsy. It's going to be even less on the screen. And so it's okay, whether they're a kindergartner or an 8th grader, like they're not going to be able to sit at that computer for as long as they might have been able to sit in a classroom, because you've got the blue light happening. It's just not as interactive. It's still a little awkward. And so patience coming from both the kid and the parent. Like, it's okay if they're getting jittery. It's okay for them to have their camera off sometimes if they want to stand, walk around while the lesson is happening. And it's not just for like hyperactive students, it's for anyone. Because
all of us.
Yeah, it's hard.
We all need breaks. For math, fractions at the end of the year is what they're going to master. In the beginning of the year, they need the foundations of adding, subtracting, multiplying, right? But they can start introducing some of the fractions pieces. And one of the biggest things in 5th and 6th grade would be theme, right? What's the theme of the book?
So one of the biggest things that that we've made the transition from the old standards to the Common Core is the idea of conceptualizing math, right? So a lot of times we would have, it's like when, the way we grew up, right, we will have 1/8, using the example that I used earlier, we'll have 1/8 times 1/2. So when you do the 1/8 times 1/2, like a lot of times we were taught in math to just find the answer, right? But nowadays, like, no, we don't really care too much about the answer. We care more about why this is the answer. Like, how did you get to, we're caring more about the why and the how. Like, how is it that 1/8 of 1/2 is 1/16, or why is it that 1/2 of 1/8 is 1/16? So
I appreciate that. It's not just the automaticity, it's understanding the concept of what does 1/8 represent? What does 1/2 represent?
Yes. And then why is it when you multiply them together, they become smaller? Like,
right. Because it's like, think about it, parents. Like, do you want half of this $50 bill, or do you want 1/8 of the $50 bill? And sometimes kids think that 1/8 is more, but it's actually less. So if you understand the concept of something, do you want half the pizza? Do you want 1/8 of the pizza? Do you want half of the bed? Do you want 1/8 of the bed? Like, you can use anything. And I think you bring up a great point. Any last closing thoughts from you, Ashley?
Just one thing, as you brought up theme, this is why I love the upper grades, is once they get into 6th grade, there's a lot of themes that happen in books that are very related to like teenage life or drama or problems. And so a lot of things I love to do is have the students have a connection piece, right? Like a self to text, like what happened to that character in that book that maybe you've experienced or your friends experienced, or maybe something that happened in that text that's happening in the world right now. And in the moment that student recognizes, like, wait, like this is actually kind of like me, that's when you can really bring them in. But knowing once your student gets to be about 6th grade to like 7th, 8th, there's actually themes that are connected to them just as they're growing adolescent self. And that's the really fun piece about reading once they get to those grade levels.
Well, thanks for sharing. Yeah, connected to their life as much as possible. Love hearing about ourselves, human beings. Any quick plugs for websites that parents can use at home to help their child or to engage their child?
yes.
Epic. Epic. I don't remember if it's a .com or a .org. It is my favorite thing. I know as an educator, I was able to create like a code. I know that some parents actually signed up for it. What I love about it is it has like various aspects to it. It has books of all kinds, like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. It has like National Geographic. I mean, there's so many different types of genre books, but they have also audiobooks. So for students that maybe are like super hyperactive, right? Like they want to be doing like drawing or sketching, but they also want to listen to something that allows them to kind of multitask. They have fun kind of like YouTube videos, but they're not YouTube videos. They're just videos of students painting or creating crafts. So it's almost like, I guess, an educational / appropriate YouTube where they can read books that are popular. They have audiobooks. They're in all sorts of different reading levels. So even if you've got a 7th grader who might read at a 1st or 2nd grade level, like there's something for everyone. And it also tracks for parents. It tracks how long they spend on a book. So if a book is 15 pages, but you see like, wait a minute, they spent a minute, like, you know that they obviously just skimmed through it. So it also has that component of like, I'm going to track how long you were reading for. And making sure that we're holding each other accountable to that stamina piece if the parents are kind of putting that stamina chart somewhere in their learning. But that is my favorite website of all time.
Awesome. Anything for writing or content?
Writing, I mean, as far as a writing teacher, I feel like we don't write as much by paper. So there's something called typing.com, which kids also really love. because it incorporates games as well. So typing is something that is just a skill that all people need to have. And so it has just different levels that students get through. It is a free program, so there doesn't need to be anything that they need to do to sign up other than like an email. But I think typing is really, really important. So typing.com, Epic. I think that would be like as much as I give a parent to give to their students. It's really easy to track. And then it's something that doesn't overwhelm the student. They're like, my parent is doing the same program as my teacher. So those are the two programs I feel like would be the most fun that the parent could catch on to really quickly.
Awesome. What about for math?
Nice. Well, mine aren't as interactive as Chapman's are, but they're still very helpful. The first one is called embark.com, or online. Actually, embark.online is EMBARC.ONLINE. That one is really great because it has, not only does it have videos based on one lesson, it has the work with it, and it has exit tickets, and it has different ways of solving it. So it teaches you the lesson, and then it shows you how to do the math. And it is broken down by grade level. It's broken down by like module. It's broken down by week, by day, by lesson. So it's really organized. It has a lot of resources for pretty much any grade level that you're looking for. So I really highly recommend that one. And also Khan Academy, khanacademy.org or .com, I'm not sure. I think it's .org. That one's a great one because like the video lessons are a lot shorter than the embark.online, but they still provide they still go straight to the point, and they still like show you a lot of what the math has to do. There's games in that one does have games related to the math lessons, and it has quizzes that you could keep track of too. So that's a really good.
I really appreciate that. And then what are 5th and 6th grade kids, 10 and 11-year-olds into right now? At least in your schools. What were they into?
TikTok.
TikTok's a big one.
TikTok.
Gaming, right? I don't know what the good games are.
There's Fortnite. A lot of them were into Fortnite.
I guess Minecraft. Some of my like older ones were still into Minecraft.
And the reason I'm saying that is because, one, they can write about those things. That can be an incentive. If you read for 20 minutes, you can be on TikTok for 5 minutes. Like, there's ways that we can build their stamina. Also, they can create dance routines on TikTok and use their creative self, right? Because you talked about creativity, Ashley. So I really appreciate that. If you're, I hope you enjoyed today's show, everybody. Today we had, thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Luis. Thank you for joining us today. And whatever you're doing with your 10 and 11-year-old, if you did get mad at them, if you snapped at them, if you had patience for their questioning, that is normal. Believe me, that is normal. They are your seed, so they can try your patience. We get it. The thing is, you also get a clean slate. And that is why today I have a reminder of whatever you're doing at home. You have a full-time job, you send them to grandma's, you're doing it, you can't do it, whatever it is, just remember you are enough. We are all working hard. We are all trying to figure this out together. And the podcast is not to make you feel bad about what you're not doing or didn't know. It's actually to give you resources to make your job at home a little easier, because a lot goes into teaching, a lot goes into teacher training programs. And I just appreciate Ashley and Luis, what they're about to embark on. And I know your kids are lucky to have you this year, and I know you're going to make it the best experience possible for them. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. I wish it was longer. I could have given more.
Right. It goes by fast.
Yeah. All right.